Casualties of the 70s. I pretty often mention it, actually more in regard with the 80s, but the 70s have enough casualties, and by that I mean bands that should have been bigger than they actually are. Should have, who said that they should or shouldn't? Well, I guess just myself and many other people who appreciate good music just think or imagine or would prefer that certain bands would have made it bigger. So, without further ado, Budgie and Horselips are match made in heaven. I actually made a review video. Check it out in my playlist. Two bands that really never really got their due, and I think at least in the case of Budgie is because they were always up there, but they never really made it to break into that level of Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. Let's just say they typically being compared to Sabbath and Rush. So when people describe Budgie, they say kind of like a combination of Priest, Sabbath, and Rush, which is you can kind of accept it. You can of course argue with that as well. And they did gain some notoriety when Metallica covered one or two of their songs. And of course, with the internet, everything is much easier to find and easier access. So they had sort of a redemption, as many other bands did, that in the music fanatics public kind of came to light, even though before that they were more unknown. Horselips is a very folkish Irish band, and they always focused on the traditional Irish music, so they're not hard rock, maybe occasionally, but kind of like a rock band. And I think they, along with Blackmore's Night, were very instrumental, very much responsible for the big boom of folk style bands that came out in kind of the 2010s, about that time. So two bands that definitely deserve your attention would be Budgie and Horselips. Who else from the 70s? Atomic Rooster, right? Another crazy, quirky band that doesn't fit anywhere. They just went and did their own thing. It's a lot of psychedelic, a lot of prog, a lot of crazy stuff. So these bands, even though there was like the big prog explosion, right, of the early 70s with the poster childs typically being Yes and Genesis and ELP and of course King Crimson, Jethro Tull, that neighborhood, they don't really fit in there. So all of these bands, for one reason or another, maybe it's not necessarily just quality, right? You have the management, how well they do the promotion and the marketing, and maybe a good deal of luck, and who knows, the public's perception or the press, but they never really made it far. I think in 1980, in one of those hideous compilations that were being pushed out by record companies like hotcakes, and many of them were horrible, many of them were good, and I think it's good because it preserved a snapshot of what was going on at the time and what record companies thought would sell or become successful. So they put one of their later songs on one of these compilations, but didn't do any good to them, and the band folded, I think, in the early 80s, but the earlier material is just excellent. Another band that sadly only lasted for a single record is Mogul Thrash. Self-titled album, I think 1970 or 71 or 72 maybe, had John Wetton on bass, and I think he also did the vocal, like this crazy fusiony prog band, actually a fusion band, vocal fusion band. What could I compare it to? Colosseum 2, let's just say, something like that. Amazing record, Mogul Thrash, check it out, it's available online. You have then Family, also wasn't such a great band, but I think they should have gotten a little bit more exposure. Well, actually, at some point they did a little bit, maybe not in the States, but in Europe and England, they did get. So you have Family. Then you have the whole family of the Gorbitz brothers, right? You had Gunn, you had then Three Man Army. They teamed up with Ginger Baker to do BGA, the Baker Gorbitz Army. Ginger Baker himself had the Ginger Baker Air Force record. So all of that kind of passed under the radar. And if you're not a diehard Ginger Baker fan, and you don't know Gun kind of became a little bit known later on because Priest covered one of their most well-known songs, Race with the Devil, or Run from the Devil's Gun, and that cover never made it to any album. But then in the 2000s, I think 2000 or 2002, they released a box set where they put all of these covers that they did that ended up never making it to an album, maybe not even on a B-side. So Gun kind of got to get known about it, but it's a pity because Adrian and Paul Gorbitz, they're such good musicians. They really should have gotten much bigger than they are. So that's, of course, there are many other bands in the 70s that you could mention. You could go to Trapeze, for example, but this, I think, really they deserve more attention from the music loving public at large and the press. You have, of course, Blue Cheer, which did gain some attention and some notoriety because someone did a documentary on Rush. Actually, not on Rush. A documentary on, I think, on heavy metal in general from a more socio-cultural perspective. I forgot what the name was. Is Metal Through the Decades or something like that. And he interviewed Geddy Lee of Rush, and Geddy Lee said that Blue Cheer was a big influence on him, and he considered it a very embryonic, a very prototypical heavy metal band. So people kind of checked it out and liked it, and they're quite a likable band. Again, I could mention here a lot of bands, but I think that this pretty much covers it. I want to mention another two, and these two maybe, well, actually one. I'm not gonna mention the second one. Sorry, changed my mind. But one of them might just belong in here, and that is April Wine. Now, April Wine doesn't squarely belong in here because they're also Canadian, and Canada always had sort of this bedlock that they didn't burst on the scene, right? Like the German bands, the Scorpions and Accept. They were always kind of a little bit on the side, and also April Wine was active more. They started in the early mid-70s, but I think they were more active and more known, at least domestically, in the 80s. But again, another band that's definitely worth checking out, and that definitely was kind of neglected by the press and the music-loving public. So that's about it. Of course, in the 70s, when the big madness started to come out, Zeppelin and Floyd and Purple and Sabbath and all of these bands, they trailed after them a lot of other bands. But again, who's to decide who becomes famous and when and why? It's kind of a tricky business. Everybody tries, but Trapeze might have become bigger, right? As Budgie should have been. People even say that Thin Lizzy never cracked the States. Although Thin Lizzy is pretty much a household name, so even people who don't necessarily know the music itself, they would recognize the name. Of course, it doesn't have a big recognition like I just say AC/DC and Pink Floyd and Metallica, but they don't truly belong in here. But these smaller acts, in my opinion, definitely deserve more attention, and people should mention them more. And it would be nice if big musicians would promote them, which happens often, but not often enough. That's kind of my beef. So Metallica could, even if not, let's just say, cover their songs, but at least talk to them or talk about the musicians that influenced them. For example, Rory Gallagher is sort of a fairly apt example for that. Look at this. I just got reminded because I saw myself in the reflection there. So Rory Gallagher was a pretty big hit, big seller in his time in the early 70s. Yet he didn't become like a big phenomenon, a big name. But a lot of musicians, I think Metallica included, but a lot, like Priest were among them. A lot of strong guitar oriented bands. Rory Gallagher a lot. I discovered him because I read an interview with, I think, Glenn Tipton or another member of Priest who mentioned Rory Gallagher, and of course Gary Moore was a big proponent of Gallagher. Unfortunately, he deceased. He was deceased altogether. So, but anyway, let's give these couple bands, and then I'm gonna do one about the 80s. But again, Budgie, Horseleeps, Atomic Rooster, Mogul Thresh, Family, Gun, BGA, Three Man Army, all of these different versions or offshoots of the Gorvitz brothers, Paul and Adrian, and Ginger Baker, and then Blue Cheer. And if you want to add April Wine, even though it belongs more into the, let's just say, category of Canadian bands and casualties of the 80s. But again, until the next time, don't forget to keep rocking on and on and on.